On this tragic day, terrorists hijacked 4 airplanes, turning these ordinary vehicles into weapons of mass destruction. The first plane flew into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City at 8:46 a.m., sending shock waves throughout the nation and the world. Less than 20 minutes later, a second plane struck the South Tower, engulfing it in flames. As smoke billowed from the iconic skyscrapers, a third plane crashed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the US military just outside of Washington, D.C. The fourth and final plane, initially headed towards Washington, D.C., crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The bravery of the passengers and crew who fought back against the hijackers prevented a potentially even greater tragedy. Terrorist group Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, claimed responsibility for the 9/11 attacks. Bin Laden, a wealthy Saudi Arabian exile, had declared war on the United States in the 1990s. He objected to the presence of American troops in Saudi Arabia, considered holy land by Muslims. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a key Al-Qaeda operative, is believed to have been the principal architect of the 9/11 attacks. He had been planning a large-scale attack on the United States for several years, and he presented his plans to bin Laden in the late 1990s. Bin Laden approved the operation, and the planning and preparation for the attacks began in earnest. The 19 hijackers involved in the 9/11 attacks were primarily from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Lebanon. They had entered the United States legally in the months leading up to the attacks, some attending flight schools to learn how to pilot commercial airplanes. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, the United States was in a state of shock and disbelief. Images of the collapsing towers, the burning Pentagon, and the smoldering crash site in Pennsylvania were broadcast around the world, leaving people everywhere feeling vulnerable and uncertain about the future. President George W. Bush, addressing the nation from the Oval Office, declared a war on terror and vowed to hunt down those responsible for the attacks. The United States, with the support of international allies, launched military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, targeting Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. The 9/11 attacks also led to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, a new cabinet-level agency tasked with protecting the United States from future terrorist attacks. The Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, was also established to enhance security at airports across the country. The events of 9/11 served as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the ever-present threat of terrorism. War on terror launched by the United States in the aftermath of 9/11 had far-reaching consequences both domestically and internationally. The US military, with the support of NATO allies, invaded Afghanistan in October 2001 with the goal of dismantling Al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban regime, which had provided safe haven to bin Laden and his followers. The war in Afghanistan lasted for 2 decades, making it the longest war in US history. While the initial military campaign successfully ousted the Taliban from power, the group continued to wage an insurgency, ultimately regaining control of Afghanistan in 2021 after the US withdrawal. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, citing concerns over weapons of mass destruction and ties to terrorism. However, no such weapons were ever found, and the war in Iraq became increasingly unpopular, both domestically and internationally. The war in Iraq had a destabilizing effect on the region, contributing to the rise of sectarian violence and the emergence of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. The war on terror had a significant financial cost, with estimates ranging in the trillions of dollars. It also led to a shift in US foreign policy, with a greater emphasis on counter-terrorism and military interventionism. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, along with the broader war on terror, continue to have a lasting impact on the global landscape. In the wake of the 9/11 attacks, the United States implemented a wide array of security measures aimed at preventing future terrorist attacks. Airports in particular became focal points for enhanced security protocols. The newly formed Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, was tasked with developing and implementing new screening procedures, including the use of metal detectors, baggage scanners, and full-body scanners. Passengers were now required to remove their shoes and belts at security checkpoints, and liquids were limited to small containers. These changes, while necessary to enhance security, also led to longer wait times at airports and a more intrusive screening process for travelers. Beyond airports, security was heightened at government buildings, transportation hubs, and other public places. Concrete barriers were erected around landmarks and security cameras became ubiquitous. The 9/11 attacks also led to the passage of the Patriot Act, a controversial law that expanded the government's surveillance powers in the name of national security. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, the US Congress passed the Patriot Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that expanded the government's surveillance powers in an effort to prevent future terrorist attacks. Passed just weeks after 9/11, was met with both support and criticism. Proponents argued that the Patriot Act was necessary to give law enforcement the tools they needed to track down terrorists and prevent future attacks. The act allowed for roving wiretaps, expanded access to phone and internet records, and increased surveillance of lone wolf terrorists, individuals acting alone without ties to terrorist organizations. However, argued that it eroded civil liberties and infringed on privacy rights. They expressed concern about the government's ability to collect vast amounts of data on citizens, potentially without their knowledge or consent. The Patriot Act's provisions on surveillance, detention, and prosecution have been the subject of ongoing debate and legal challenges, highlighting the complex balance between national security and individual freedoms. The debate over the Patriot Act reflects the broader tension between security and liberty that has emerged in the post-9/11 world. Attacks had a profound and often devastating impact on Muslim Americans. In the aftermath of the attacks, there was a surge in Islamophobia, fueled by fear, anger, and misinformation. Muslims, often perceived as being associated with the terrorists responsible for the attacks, faced increased discrimination, harassment, and violence. Mosques were vandalized, Muslim women wearing hijabs were targeted, and many Muslim Americans reported experiencing verbal and physical abuse. The conflation of Islam, a religion practiced by over 1 billion people worldwide, with the actions of a small group of extremists, fueled prejudice and created a climate of fear and distrust. The 9/11 attacks also led to increased scrutiny of Muslim communities by law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The Patriot Act, in particular, raised concerns about racial and religious profiling, as it allowed for increased surveillance of individuals based on their religion or ethnicity. Despite these challenges, Muslim Americans have been resilient in the face of adversity. The 9/11 attacks had a profound and enduring impact on the United States and the world. The attacks not only resulted in the loss of thousands of innocent lives, but also fundamentally altered the global landscape, ushering in an era marked by a heightened sense of fear and insecurity. The war on terror launched by the United States in the aftermath of 9/11 has had far-reaching consequences, including the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the rise of drone warfare, and the expansion of surveillance technologies. The attacks also led to increased security measures at airports and other public places, as well as the passage of controversial legislation like the Patriot Act, which raised concerns about civil liberties and privacy rights. The 9/11 attacks also had a significant impact on American culture, shaping everything from movies and music to literature and art. The attacks served as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the ever-present threat of terrorism, leading to a sense of anxiety and vulnerability that has permeated American society. The enduring legacy of 9/11 is complex and multifaceted, encompassing themes of loss, resilience, unity, and division. As we commemorate the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, it is essential to remember the victims, honor the heroes, and reflect on the lessons learned from this tragedy. Remembering 9/11 is not just about looking back at a single day in history, but about understanding its enduring impact on our world. It is a responsibility we all share to combat hatred, intolerance, and extremism in all its forms. We must challenge prejudice, promote understanding, and build bridges between communities. Education plays a vital role in fostering tolerance and empathy. By learning about different cultures, religions, and perspectives, we can challenge stereotypes and promote respect for diversity. We must also remember the importance of critical thinking and media literacy. By learning to critically evaluate information from a variety of sources, we can make informed decisions and avoid falling prey to prejudice and hate.
The night was dark in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Unbeknownst to the world, a team of US Navy SEALs was closing in on a target. Their mission: capture or kill Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind 9/11. The date was May 2, 2011. The compound, a three-story structure, held the world's most wanted man. Tension was high as the SEALs breached the compound walls. Gunfire erupted. Bin Laden's couriers and family members fought back fiercely. But the SEALs were highly trained. They moved swiftly, room to room, until they found their target. Bin Laden, unarmed, was shot and killed. The operation, codenamed Neptune's Spear, was a success. The world held its breath as news of his death spread like wildfire. The long hunt for the leader of Al-Qaeda was finally over. The aftermath was swift. The US took custody of bin Laden's body, whisking it away to a secure location. Photos of his lifeless face with its unkempt beard and closed eyes were soon circulating amongst intelligence officials. The world waited with bated breath, eager to know what would become of the remains of the man who had terrorized a generation. The US government faced a dilemma: how to bury the body of Osama bin Laden. Traditional burial on land, even in a secret location, carried immense risk. His grave could become a pilgrimage site for extremists, a potent symbol of anti-Western sentiment. The US needed a solution that would prevent such a scenario. Burial at sea emerged as the most viable option. This method, though uncommon for Muslims, offered a solution to the security concerns. It ensured that no physical marker would exist, no place for followers to gather and pay homage. The vastness of the ocean would serve as his final resting place, his grave unmarked and unknown. The decision was not taken lightly. It was made after careful deliberation, weighing the potential consequences of each option. The US government consulted Islamic scholars to ensure the burial would be conducted with respect, albeit with some necessary deviations due to the extraordinary circumstances. Within 24 hours of his death, bin Laden's body was prepared for burial according to Islamic customs, as much as possible. His body was washed, shrouded, and prayers were said. Then, in a solemn ceremony aboard the USS Carl Vinson, an aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea, bin Laden was consigned to the waves. Adding another layer of complexity to the situation was the response from Saudi Arabia. Bin Laden's birthplace, a country with deep Islamic traditions, refused to accept his remains. This decision was not entirely surprising. Despite his family's wealth and influence in the kingdom, bin Laden had become a persona non grata in his homeland. His extremist views and terrorist activities had severed ties with his family and alienated him from the Saudi government. He was a source of shame, a stark contrast to the image of moderation and peace that the kingdom wished to project. Saudi Arabia's refusal to accept bin Laden's body underscored the depth of his estrangement. It was a powerful symbolic act, distancing the kingdom from the man who had once walked its streets and prayed in its mosques. The refusal eliminated any possibility of burying him on Saudi soil, further solidifying the decision for a burial at sea. The world watched, interpreting Saudi Arabia's refusal as a condemnation of bin Laden's actions. It was a clear message that the kingdom would not harbor a terrorist, even in death. The weight of his legacy, one of violence and extremism, had become too heavy for even his own country to bear. The burial at sea, while a practical solution, raised questions about its adherence to Islamic tradition. Islamic law emphasizes the importance of prompt burial, preferably within 24 hours, and in direct contact with the earth. Burial at sea, while permissible in some cases, is generally considered a last resort. The US government, acutely aware of the religious sensitivities, made efforts to follow Islamic burial rites as closely as possible. Bin Laden's body was washed and shrouded in a white cloth as per Islamic tradition. A Muslim cleric was present to oversee the rites and offer prayers in Arabic. However, certain deviations were unavoidable. The most significant departure was the burial at sea itself. Islamic scholars debated the acceptability of this practice, with some arguing that it violated the sanctity of the deceased. The urgency of the situation, coupled with the lack of viable alternatives, ultimately led to the decision to proceed with the unconventional burial. Despite the controversies, the US government maintained that it had treated bin Laden's remains with respect, within the constraints of the situation. The burial at sea, they argued, was the best way to ensure security and prevent his grave from becoming a shrine for extremism.